The Sentinels are perhaps the scariest villains in any Marvel movie in recent years. Plenty of MCU, Sony, and 20th Century Fox movies have villains that are intimidating, threatening, and engaging, but none are just as straight up menacing as the Sentinels in Days of Future Past. These things just don't care. They have one goal and one goal alone, and they will stop at nothing to complete it. Once you see those yellow eyes, you know there's basically no winning. You run or you die. Hell, this movie shows us that in the first 5 minutes. I remember watching this in the theater for the first time, and it felt like I had barely just sat down, and already Iceman is getting his head popped off, Colossus is getting stomped, and everybody else is just getting slapped around. The movie came about back in 2014, and at this point the MCU formula had already been very clearly established. It definitely worked, but it didn't lend itself well to building the tension needed for an actually imposing villain. It's hard to make your antagonists effectively scary while your protagonists are cracking jokes every couple of minutes. Days of Future Past, however, completely flips that on its head. As soon as the mutants know the Sentinels are on their way, there's no witty one-liners or quips. All they can do is stand there and prepare themselves for the worst. Silently, with the unstoppable efficiency of a perfect machine, the Sentinels engage the mutants, and to the audience, it immediately becomes clear that this isn't going to be like other Marvel movies. These villains don't feel pain, they don't get distracted, they barely even stop moving, as again and again the X-Men hit them with everything they've got. And then we get this perfect scene where the music begins to build and swell, the mutants' faces all fall as they realize their attacks are ineffective, and the Sentinels actually adapt right before our very eyes. When I say this was terrifying the first time I saw it in the theater, I really mean it. I had seen the Sentinels in the comics before, and yeah, they were scary, but they were pretty cool antagonists. But they were still just comic book robots. But these Sentinels were just different. They were machines. They didn't feel like they were adapted from a comic book, they felt like they were adapted from a horror novel. Not only do the Sentinels kill a mutant, but they render their powers, their special abilities, and essentially their entire identity, which many of them have probably struggled with their whole lives up to this point, completely void. They are a perfect and completely invalidating foil to the X-Men in this movie. The design of the Sentinels is also a strong point in this movie. Sleek, tall, and dark, they strike a very imposing figure. Their proportions are also pretty unusual, with elongated limbs and neck. It's very evocative of the uncanny valley effect. I already mentioned their eyes, and they do a lot for the design, being the one splash of color in an otherwise colorless palette. Several times throughout the movie, you can see the scales on the Sentinel's body change, allowing them to adapt and change to overcome whatever mutation they're dealing with. They actually seem to have a bunch of different powers they can access: adaptation, super strength, flight, shape-shifting, energy projection, and maybe even more. The Sentinels aren't just menacing, they're also just really, really cool. In the final battle, we see the X-Men have to bust out their big guns to actually do some damage to them. Storm and Magneto do team up in a really cool scene and do a bit of damage, but it doesn't last long, and still the Sentinels march on. I saw it often mentioned that the Sentinels could be observed as prioritizing, taking out some mutants before others. In the final battle, they get Storm and Magneto out of their way first, the two biggest hitters. This shows that despite their silence, they have a predatory level of intelligence and work together with frightening coherence. I honestly don't know if we've ever seen such an intimidating villain in a Marvel movie since then. Don't get me wrong, there are some excellent Marvel villains out there that have been adapted to the big screen. But at the end of the day, they're all doing the same thing. They throw the heroes around for a while, they give a big monologue on their origins or their motivations, and generally they do what a comic book villain does. They play up the villain aspect well, but typically you're not really afraid that the main character in these films is going to fail or die. Granted, there are exceptions to this. Sometimes they really are just trying to outright kill the hero. The first time we see the Winter Soldier comes to mind. That's a thrilling fight scene with plenty of tension. Yet still, at the end of the movie, the hero escapes unscathed. That is simplifying things quite a bit, but then when you consider how the Sentinels are written in Days of Future Past, it's certainly warranted. This movie doesn't give characters plot armor of any kind. The Sentinels don't try to capture them or restrain them. They go for kill shots nearly every single time. They stab, slice, burn, whatever they need to do to defeat their opponents. It's actually really brutal, and it's jarring seeing your favorite childhood superheroes get ripped in half or dismembered. But damn, it is effective. It gives the plot some real stakes and makes the opposition intimidating. It makes you question what you've always known about these films in the back of your head and say, shit, are the X-Men actually going to lose? Because it's hard to see how they could actually win against these things. It's ballsy to try and do this in any kind of media, but when it's pulled off well, it's always worth it. 10 years later, and it still is. The special effects for the Sentinels and their adaptations still look great. They're still incredibly intimidating, brutal, and absolutely relentless. This movie really set a gold standard for Marvel villains, and nothing else has really lived up to it yet. Considering the state of most current Marvel projects, be it shows or films, I think the creative teams could really take a lot away from Days of Future Past and the way the Sentinels are written and used in the movie so expertly. In a comic book movie, where the suspension of disbelief is already very high, it's tough to make the audience be afraid of the antagonist, but here, they did it right. What do you think? Were the Sentinels effective villains? I certainly thought so 10 years ago in the theater, and I think they still hold up today. But let me know in the comments what you think, and if you enjoyed the video, go ahead and drop a like. And if you want to see more, hit the subscribe button. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.